properly. Now, from this intervention, I would like to go to a very important topic on the vision of new economy, which is PPPs, the private-public partnerships, and address the questions to Mr. Ziad Alexandre Hayek. He's joining us from Lebanon. So, my first question to Mr. Ziad, as the president of the World Associations of PPPs and the vice chair of the UN Working Party on PPP as well, can you explain to us how can partnership between the two sectors actively optimize the potential of economic collaboration, especially across the Mediterranean region?
Thank you very much, Ms. Patricia, for inviting me to this important meeting. Look, we have a proverb in Lebanese that says one hand cannot clap by itself. So anything that the private sector does by itself or the public sector does by itself, it leaves a lot on the table. It is the cooperation of the two together that can create emergence and can create real synergies. So PPP is a very important tool to be used when it is appropriate to do so. It is not a panacea. It cannot do everything. But I think that I was listening to Mr. Carré talking about R&D and talking about cybersecurity and even space and communication. And I think these are very important for Europe to develop, and they cannot be developed by governments. The governments will always need the private sector in these fields. And so therefore having a strategy for how to approach PPP, whether it is at the national level or at the European level, to create these projects that can allow Europe to compete with the major players around the planet today, I think are very important. But I'll get to civil economy, which I think is an important topic for this meeting. And here I can go to the local level. The local level, PPP is an instrument that has been used very effectively around the world at the municipal level or at the regional level. For example, municipal services, anything from waste management to street lighting to parking to even communication, Wi-Fi, region, locally, etc. All of that can be done on a PPP basis. There are many, many very successful examples around the world that can be implemented. Now, the tricky part about municipal PPPs or local PPPs tends to be the size of the projects. So normally when you do a public-private partnership project, you spend a lot of money on studying the project, on hiring consultants, financial consultants, legal consultants, technical consultants. And regulations always oblige you to have an environmental impact assessment and a social impact assessment. And by the time you pay for all of that, it becomes prohibitive to do a project on a PPP basis when it is on a small scale. That's why at the World Association of PPP Units and Professionals this year, we have dedicated the entire year to the study of small-scale PPPs, because we believe that we are not as a global community going to be able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals unless we use private sector financing, and not as we are doing currently with 300 projects a year globally, but we need more like 10,000 projects a year. So what are the problems at the local level? They tend to be finding the financing. They tend to be the cost of preparing the project. They tend to be issues related to how does this community cooperate with other communities around it for smaller scale projects. And these are some of the problems, and then there are some of the solutions that accompany that. So when communities band together, they can do projects like on a level of a region instead of a municipality. Some projects, for example, you may decide not to do environmental impact assessment or social impact assessment for, because they are clearly beneficial, such as solar energy, for example. And then you have the idea of course, having standard documentation, as has been used by the World Bank, for example, for solar energy, but this can be applied to all sectors. So if you have standard documentation within a country, a nation, or even at the European level for a particular sector or particular type of service, then you don't need to go through all the costs of hiring lawyers for every project, or necessarily the banks would find it much easier to do their due diligence in order to be able to finance the companies that are going to invest in those projects.
Okay, Mr. Hayek, I want to zero in more on this topic that you have already gave us a great overarching overview. And I want to go to challenged economies. In particular, how can successful PPPs of different scales and sizes can contribute to solidifying fragile economies such as Lebanon's, for example?
Well, PPP can start even at the level of what we call, the word is escaping me right now, but it's like reconstruction phase after a war, for example. This can be applied to not only in parts of Lebanon today, but in like areas of conflict, post-conflict situations. Normally, you may have an entire area that's destroyed, and the most important investment is a good hotel, because if investors don't have a good hotel, they cannot go there. And so the first PPP project typically in a post-conflict area is good hotels. But you can, of course, move beyond that so that you have urban development. In Lebanon, we have the experience of redeveloping the center of Beirut after the civil war, which was entirely destroyed. And so and this can be applied, for example, places like Turkey after an earthquake or etc. Peru is experiencing some of this right now with such an approach. So urban development can be very important, not only for societies after conflict, but even for a normal city. A normal city may have an area within it that needs gentrification. Some of the older parts of older cities need really, people want to live there, but the place is dilapidated. So investing in infrastructure, bringing in a plan for that part of the city with a private company, PPP could be used there very effectively. Another thing actually that we have experienced in Lebanon, and I think is very important example for the rest of the world. As you may know, we have had a civil war started in 1975 for 15 years. And during that time, the government stopped providing essential services. And so it was NGOs, really the not-for-profit sector, that picked up the slack and started providing services, anything related to healthcare or education or other areas, elderly care and other areas that are social services as such. And so this has led to a great experience with public-private partnerships between the government and not-for-profit organizations. And this can be applied very nicely at the local level as well, of course, where a lot of the services are delivered by NGOs. They tend to be more dedicated, they tend to be more effective, they tend to have a lot of advantages. And I think this is something that can be considered for civil economic development around the world as well.
Mr. Hayek, on these insights, they're very important, especially in terms of post-conflict, as a large part of the Mediterranean is either politically challenged with conflict or economically challenged with poverty and other problems, especially in the eastern and the southern side of the sea. So thank you so much for this contribution. Now I would like